For many long years, the Pact of Bones held. Bolgo's Spine Crusher led the Tarkan Warglut along the hunting trails time and time again, but he forbade them from devouring the skeletons of their many victims. Yet, the old tyrant's rule was threatened from within by those who scorned his appeasement of Nagash's legions. With the signing of the Pact of Bones, war between the Ossiarch Bone Reapers and the Ogres of the Tarkan Warglut was avoided, at least temporarily. Vokmortian returned to his master's side, and Bolgo's Spine Crusher led his hunting parties away from the endless boneyard and into lands stricken by war, where meat and riches were both plentiful. The Tarkan thrived and grew fat upon the constant cycle of conflict that dominated the land of Halost. Always searching for their next meal, they journeyed along winding routes through the desert and across hazardous mountain valleys. Falling upon anything unfortunate enough to stand in their path, the Ogres filled their bellies with flesh and the saddlebags of their Rhinox mounts with plunder. Soon, Spinecrusher's gut plate could barely conceal his prodigious girth, and the Tarkan subsumed several lesser wargluts, after messily consuming any naysayers, of course. Throughout the Tarkan's golden age, Spinecrusher held onto his word and never once feasted upon the bones of his victims. Food was plentiful in those days of constant battle, and so his warriors were, for the most part, happy to adhere to the Pact of Bones. Anyone who openly muttered their dissatisfaction had their brains splattered by a swing of Spinecrusher's great thunder mace, and this proved sufficient discouragement. Indeed, as they passed back and forth through the baking deserts of the endless boneyard on their great raids, the Ogres deposited the picked clean trophies they had gathered on their travels in great piles. This was done with something approaching reverence, for old Spinecrusher had come to see Nagash as an agent of the almighty Gorkamorka, the great beast that consumes the realms. After all, what was the Shaiish Nadir if not a vast maw, devouring all put before it? Years passed into decades. Under the command of Catacross, the Ossiarch Bone Reapers advanced far across the lands of Halost, driving their mortal foes into panicked retreat. On the open plains and valleys of the land of dead heroes, their grand formations of spear-wielding Mortek warriors and devastating Kavalos Death Riders seemed all but invincible. Even the Stormcast Eternals were routed in decisive battles at Mons Faris and on the banks of the Daxamatic River. More and more of Halost was claimed in the name of Nagash. No glorious reign lasts forever, especially in the brutal and violent society of the Gutbuster Ogres, and the once undisputed rule of Bolgo's Spinecrusher was beginning to show signs of splintering. The tyrant's unconventional ideology was becoming increasingly unpopular amongst the younger, brusher Ogres of the Warglut, who were offended by the very notion of leaving anything uneaten. They looked upon the piles of skulls and rib cages left in tribute to the Ossiarch Bone Reapers, and only saw weakness and wasted food. The leader of these discontents was none other than Bolgo's own offspring, the ambitious Kargut Kin-Eater, who had returned after several decades spent upon the battlefields of northern Halost. Kargruk had made his name as a fearsome mercenary, renting his services and those of the troop of Ogres for hire known as the Bully Boys out to the Chaos Lords, Free Guild generals and Auric megabosses alike. Now he had returned to the Mathgar Mountains, fat and rich. He had no intention of bowing to anyone, not least his own flesh and blood. Family loyalties mean very little in Gutbuster society, and even amongst his own kind, Kagruk was regarded as particularly ruthless. As a pot-bellied youth, he had bludgeoned to death and consumed all 5 of his brothers, an act that granted him the name Kin-Eater and the amused approval of his father. Karguk's pride and appetite were equally gargantuan, and he resented bowing to the will of any other creature, especially some gutless sack of bones, as he put it. He grumbled to his followers over the hiss and bubble of the war camp's meat cauldrons, asking why the mighty Tarkan warglut was bearing its belly to some skeletal lord whose armies were mired in battles far to the north. Ogors did not pick and choose what they ate according to the will of their enemies, Kagruk insisted. Ogors ate it all, and if anyone tried to stop them, they would find themselves in the cooking pot. A younger, more vital Bolgo spine-crusher may have caught the scent of rebellion in the air. As it was, the first the old tyrant knew of his son's ambitions was when Kargruk marched boldly up to his moor throne. The Kin-Eater removed his gut plate, casting it down at the spine-crusher's feet. Silence fell across the tyrant's longhouse. A challenge had been issued for control of the warglut, and Bolgo Spinecrusher was forced to answer. The brawl that followed would enter the annals of the Tarkan as one of the bloodiest in their history. Casting aside his own golden belly armor, Bolgo Spinecrusher leaped from his throne and fell upon his challenger, moving with surprising swiftness for one with such tremendous girth. This would be a fight to the death, and the winner would spill his defeated enemy's intestines across the floor of the throne room. Bolgo's thunder mace clashed against his son's beast skewer glaive, and the audience of watching Ogors roared and guffawed in delighted appreciation. Spinecrusher fought hard, but against the power and vitality of his son, he was sorely outmatched. A vicious headbutt from Kargruk dropped Spinecrusher to the floor. With a victorious howl, the young warrior fell upon his stricken father and tore open the old tyrant's guts with his own teeth. Wiping away the last gory remnants of his disposed kin from his chin, Kargruk took up Spinecrusher's thunder mace and lashed the dead ogre's gilded gutplate around his own belly. Thus began the reign of Tyrant Kargruk Kin-Eater. His first command was that the Tarkan warglut embark upon a great raid, passing through the endless boneyard and consuming everything they laid their eyes upon, including the bones. This order was received with a mighty cheer from the gathered Ogors. The Ossiarch Bone Reapers of Kartok were caught entirely unawares by Kin-Eater's sudden betrayal. Before an armed response could be mustered, many sources of fine bone had already been devoured. The barrow tombs of Caleth were ransacked, the precious mummified bodies of the desert princes consumed, and their treasures sundered or stolen. Great portions of the valley known as Titan's Grave were smashed to ruin, the mighty remnants of ancient colossi cracked open, and the marrow drained. The only bones left were rotten, blackened things, unsuitable for crafting even the lowest skeletal serf. The lords of the Ossiarch Bone Reapers could not comprehend the logic of the Tarkan's actions. There was no shortage of food to be found in the war-torn lands of Halost, so why would their former allies risk obliteration by breaking the Pact of Bones? Though Nagash had imbued his elite legions with a flicker of autonomy, they lacked the capacity to understand the primal selfish desires that drove their enemies. Vokmortian, master of the Bone Tithe, was dispatched to Kartok by the great necromancer to pass judgment over the treacherous Tarkan. The emissary of Nagashazar was enraged by the Ogor's reckless and illogical actions, but he had long since ceased to be surprised by the duplicity and self-destructive delusions of mortals. The master of the Bone Tithe could feel the icy fury of his master's rage coursing through his body, but he did not let that anger dictate his actions. He shared his master's patient, calculating nature. First, he would discern the reason that the wanton greed of the Tarkan warglut had been unleashed after so many years of peace. Then, the Tarkan would pay dearly for their insult. Perhaps once the stolen bones had been recovered, stripped from the corpses of the traitorous Ogors, he would allow one or two of the creatures to survive. They would flee the endless boneyard and carry word of the punishment that awaited those who defied the Ossiarch Bone Reapers across the mortal realms. Word soon reached Kargrat Kinneater that the undead legions were emerging from the deathly sandstorms of the endless boneyard, marching to the border of the Tarkan's territory. The Tyrant looked upon the armies of death that Bolgo Spinecrusher had so feared, and he was not impressed. Summoning his bully boys, the Tyrant made ready for war. He planned to parley with these fleshless intruders, to draw them in close enough that he could smash them to pieces and feast upon their bones. Idly, Tyrant Kinneater wondered what the polished armor of the Ossiarch Bone Reapers would taste like, and his belly rumbled in anticipation.